Okay, here we go with the overview of the course to just kind of start things off. Um, a big part of this course, or what I'm trying to achieve, and what I have a lot of confidence in, is my ability to work at trying to show you how math is actually used um, in a lot of decision making. And now, what I suppose I don't have as much confidence in is that I'm necessarily picking the right things, or that I can get things done in the kind of time that I would like, because it's hard. And so, I will say that even though one of your first videos in module one, the person is, or the title or something like that, I think, it mentions math is not hard. Well, that's not true. An overview of the course, yes, math is hard. Now, is every aspect of it hard? That kind of thing? No, not every aspect is hard. But in general, the idea of pursuing things mathematically and quantitatively and so forth, it is hard, and there's no two ways about it. It's now, why is it hard? Well, because sometimes, as we try to model what's going on in the real world, it gets kind of difficult to pin down what the heck is really going on. And so then to put mathematics with it, well, that gets really hard, because it's just hard to really figure out what the heck is going on in the real world. And so that can be hard. And sometimes, math is an old and big body of knowledge. It gets hard to kind of keep everything straight in the mathematics itself. And often, when we go through and try to work on actually using math to solve problems, quite often our first shot at it isn't quite right. You might say it's wrong, but not necessarily wrong, but maybe just not as good as you'd like, and that can get very frustrating, which also makes it hard. But a lot of things in life are hard. This summer has been the Olympics, and I watch that stuff. That stuff looks hard. But what have people done? They've worked hard at it, and they've persevered, and they've gotten somewhere. And so, math is the same way. You have to work at it. If you're looking for something that's just easy and you don't want to work at it, well, yeah, math isn't it. I have to work at math, and I've done pretty well as far as succeeding with math. So math is hard. You have to work at it. That's okay. Things in life are worth working for, and so that's the first thing. Math is hard. Now, what am I trying to do, though, to make it more digestible and so forth? This course is taken by a lot of human services majors and a lot of criminal justice majors. And so, what I'm trying to do this semester is kind of go with an overarching problem that most of our work in here we can tie back to, not necessarily all of it, but this overarching problem. And in this case, crisis intervention centers have really been making the news in the last year to 2 years. Crisis intervention center. And in this case, our problem is going to be staffing. It's kind of looking at how we allocate staff to some crisis intervention centers. But this, I think if you are in human services or in criminal justice, or for that matter, just vote. I think this is a very pertinent problem right now, and as far or topic anyway, and then the staffing problem. But these crisis intervention centers, people are talking about these to alleviate some of the burden in criminal justice from police officers to some other aspect of our system for cases of mental health. And I think personally, this is something very much worth looking at is better mental health access and services and so forth to try to reduce the burden on our public safety officers. Because in my case, I teach college, but my wife teaches in the public schools, and I see similar things going on there. Is that so? I'm on a soapbox for a moment, but I see a lot of mental health things being thrown onto teachers, and I don't think that's the best idea. Similarly, I don't think attending to mental health is the best solution as a job description for public safety officers. I think that should be left to mental health officials, but we should also staff such things. And so I think this is a very pertinent problem, both for the people who are right there involved, the mental health people, counselors, that kind of thing, public safety officers. I think it's very important for them, definitely, but also because it will involve funding and so forth. I think our general public needs to be thinking about such things. So I thought this was just a nice problem that's current, and we're going to look more at the mathematical side and what we need to better understand how you actually do it. How do you look at staffing these centers, and what kinds of mathematical work goes into it, and so that's our overarching problem. And as we look at that problem, what we find is, I found a particular article and that gave me this idea, and what we'd like to do is try to, our objective is to reduce gaps in accessibility, accessibility to the centers and services and so forth across the population. Okay, so that seems like a reasonable way to go. I mean, there are other objectives we could have, and at some point we'll kind of talk about that. But what we'll work toward is an objective of reducing the gap. So what I mean by that is you would all people across the population to have about the same accessibility, and we'll have to get into defining what accessibility is and that sort of thing. But if I live in one area of town or one area of the state or something like that, I would like to have the same accessibility to the staffing of this crisis intervention center as somebody in another part of town, or say another part of the state, depending on how big a region we're looking at. And so the real problem is you will have multiple crisis intervention centers, but maybe you shouldn't staff each one exactly the same in order to try to level out the accessibility so there aren't big gaps between different populations, different areas. And so part of that accessibility then, this kind of gets us to where we're going here in Module 1. Accessibility, in this case, is defined by distance. Now again, there are other things one could define, and of course, we won't be able to go into everything, because again, part of this is to show you why what we're doing can matter in a bigger context. But in the end, we're also, we're asked to work on particular skills and that kind of thing within the course. And so again, I will work very hard at trying to show you how these questions that we look at in a smaller scale within class fit into the bigger societal questions that we're trying to answer. So, as we look at this idea of accessibility to, say, crisis centers or any other service, a fire station or or police stations or grocery stores or anything, one big aspect of accessibility is distance. Because, if I live next door to a crisis center and I need help for some reason, it's pretty easy for me to get there. But if I'm 50 miles away and half of that is on mountain roads and that kind of thing, well, maybe it wouldn't be so easy for me to get these services from this accessibility, or in the sense of accessibility from this crisis center. And so a big aspect of accessibility is distance. Price and so forth are other aspects. But we're going to concentrate on distance, partly because it's a mathematical concept that kind of fits with this course. And so the thing is, as I mentioned, with distance, well, I could be next door, I could be 50 miles away, but in Module 1, what we want to look at is defining and measuring distance. Distance. Okay, so that turns out to be a problem in and of itself, is how do we define distance? And so what we want to look at in Module 1 is what do we mean by distance and how might we measure it? And, at first thought, you may think, oh, this is simple. But no, it's not. Defining and measuring distance in context can be very complicated as to how we decide what we mean by this distance, and then how do we actually measure it. And we'll see that in our introduction to Module 1. And so that's where we're starting. So we're looking at this overarching problem, come back here, of crisis intervention center staffing. But in solving that problem, we have an objective, and we would like to reduce the gaps, or now more technically, mathematically, we would say we would like to reduce the variance in accessibility. In other words, try to get it as close to an even accessibility across our population. So nobody has more accessibility or less accessibility. That would be a nice thing. And so that's our objective. Now, to get at that objective, though, we have to define what the heck we mean by accessibility. So we have that, and we're going to define it mostly in terms of distance. We'll look at some other aspects of it as well, but we'll start there, distance. And when you think about it, as far as accessibility or being able to utilize the services of something, certainly distance is a big factor. And so that's where we're going to start, is with this notion of distance. And we will see that, just to say how far is it or what's the distance, is not necessarily an obvious thing. And so that will get us into why we need to try to define things in mathematics in particular ways, and why we might have multiple definitions, or in other words, more than one way of defining something. And so that's where we're going with this. So that's our initial overview, and next we'll start on module 1.